Happy Memorial Day weekend, everybody here in the United States. And for those who have served, will serve, or are serving currently, thank you so much for your sacrifice and your support for this great country. Today's episode on today's Species Canine podcast, we're going to discuss the founding fathers and mothers of modern day dog training. Stay tuned to the end where I will give you my personal opinion on the most influential individual in the world of dog training. So stay tuned. This is Species Canine Podcast. All right. So first up here, the podcast is going to consist mostly of the individuals that contributed a lot of the science and to dog training. I'm not going to get into their methods and methodologies or any of that stuff or give any type of criticism. This is simply a knowledge base for you to have and want to go on and research more for yourself. You can go ahead and do that. So we're going to jump right on into it. So number one, Ivan Pavlov is a Russian psychologist who studied and founded classical conditioning, ring, bell, dog, drools. So that's the premise of most modern day dog trainers. Tell dog sit, dog sits, dog gets a reward. Pretty simple. Developed that many years ago, and it's still live and thriving today. Fast forward a little bit, and then he comes along with B.F. Skinner, the founder of operant conditioning, understanding how punishment decreases behaviors and how reward schedules work and all kinds of amazing things. Skinner was really well known for studying pigeons, cats, dogs, even some kids we've discussed before, and his contribution to the world of dog training is paramount. But without the true understanding of operant conditioning and how positive reinforcement works and negative reinforcement and positive punishment and negative punishment all coalesce to increase or decrease behaviors, we wouldn't have modern day dog training. He was one of the pioneers of all of that. And if you haven't read any of his stuff, I highly suggest you do. Simply because he also showed us what happens when you do things out of order and you do things that are too adversive or the timing on things are not right. Go read the study, The Superstitious Pigeon. Go read about his learned helplessness and escape conditioning when punishment is involved. All really great stuff that so many people today in the dog training world simply don't read and don't understand. And we really need to go back to the roots of what we do today to understand what we are doing. Okay. Konrad Most. He was a famous dog trainer in Germany and worked with a lot of military working dogs and police dogs and built upon a lot of stuff. However, one of the things that he did, which was actually years before Skinner published anything about operant conditioning, is he understood the effects of punishment and reinforcement and was talking about that in great detail. He also was using a lot of positive punishment, leash corrections, choke chains, things like that, prong collars for obedience. And even when his book, The Dog Trainer's Manual, or Dog Training's a Manual, it was published, again, republished back in the early 2000s, it came with the disclaimer that, hey, the techniques in this probably not be good for your average pet dog. But he did contribute a lot into the field of dog training. Next up on our list is William Koehler. He published a book, several books actually, The Koehler Method of Training, a compulsory trainer. He wanted to use a lot of force, a lot of corrections and things like that. He is famous for saying in his book, and coining the protest biters, meaning every time he gave a dog some type of a correction, they would redirect and try to bite him, and he would solve that by suspending the dogs off the ground with a choke chain and essentially hanging them to discourage that behavior. But he did run the War Dog Training Center in California during World War II and was working with a lot of high drive type dogs, which I would fully expect to have a lot of, as he coined, protest biting. you would expect that out of a very dominant and aggressive dog. His information that he put out there led to a better understanding of training in the long term. We have Karen Pryor. Karen Pryor was a force-free trainer. She was very adamant about clicker training and using clickers and markers and the positive reinforcement. She was famous for publishing a book, Do Not Shoot the Dog. And her company still exists today, and it's being run by, I don't think it's family, but I think it's a guy named Ken Ramirez, who is now running the business there. You can go to her website and read about what she does if you're interested in the force-free and clicker method. I do suggest that you read her site where she talks about operant conditioning and being a leading proponent of operant conditioning, but she's also force-free and positive training only. Now, as we progress a little bit further into the world of not just dog training, but animal training, we meet the Brelands. Keller and Marion Breland, they were actual students of B.F. Skinner. They were graduate students working on their PhDs and studying under Skinner himself. And they decided, for whatever reason, hey, this school thing is not going to work for us no more. We're going to go train animals on the commercial level and become filthy rich doing that. And they did. They opened up the IQ Zoo and would go on to do amazing things in the world of animal behavior, animal studies, animal training. They published several different papers that essentially were kind of swept under the table because they simply did not possess the education or the degrees. After Keller's death, Marion actually married Bob Bailey, who worked with them at the IQ Zoo. And Bob Bailey was very well known in that world and worked for the CIA and the military, doing some really amazing stuff with animals, marine animals, birds, cats, and things like that for spying purposes. The Brelands did put out, and I think actually it was published with Bob Bailey as well, The Misbehavior of Organisms, where they just started talking about instinctual drift. The picture there of the pig putting the coin, what happened is instinctual drift. They started to realize that when they're asking an animal to perform a trait that is closely related to something they would do instinctually, they would give up their training and go back to that instinctual activity. Particularly with the pig, when they're teaching them to pick up the wooden coin, the pig eventually would just start flipping it and rooting it with his nose and would stop picking it up no matter what the behavior was being asked and being reinforced. This is instinctual drift. So understanding that in the world of dog training will come a long way if you understand all of that. They did a lot of stuff with ravens and pigeons and doing some really cool stuff with the CIA. There's a lot of information out there about that. There's probably more information that is still classified on what they were doing, especially during the Cold War era and the early 50s. But it's worth reading about and understanding what the Brelands and Bob Bailey gave to the world of animal training. Touched a little briefly there on Bob Bailey, but Bob Bailey was highly recognized for his military background, working with marine animals and doing significant training with every animal he could come across. He is famous for saying there was not an animal he did not meet that he could not train, and just simply using that operant conditioning and going through the process of training complex things to simple animals. And he did that over and over again on a massive scale. And because of what they just showed at the IQ Zoo, what the Brelands and Bob Bailey did is why I can sit here today and I can say there's no such thing as a stubborn dog. It's simply motivation, and that no dog is untrainable. There's trainers out there who will say the dog is untrainable. Dogs are stubborn. This is why I can say that. If you can get a kangaroo, mouse, or rat to do things that Bob Bailey did, you can get a dog to do some things. So it has nothing to do with that. And Bob Bailey proved that at the IQ Zoo and all the amazing things that he did. So up next, we have Ray Coppinger. Ray Coppinger is a biologist. He was a sled dog racer. He worked with a lot of guardian breeds and farm dogs, herding dogs and the flock guardians, and a lot with huskies and Malamutes for sled racing. He actually won some pretty amazing events doing that. But as a biologist, he wanted to study genetics and the working dogs and understanding what made these dogs tick, essentially, and how to better understand that and how to use that to make a better trained dog. He also wrote about evolution and domestication of wild wolves into our modern day dogs. His theory is self-domestication, which I completely agree with. And self-domestication is basically put as these wolves were following ancient man and living off of their refuge. So ancient man makes a big kill, kills a big wildebeest or whatever it may be. They leave behind scraps. These wolves would then feed off of that and quickly realized, classical conditioning, the humans aren't that bad. If we stick around these things and keep our distance, we can eat their refuge. And through that genetic breeding, those wolves would have offspring that were less timid of humans, and those would have less fear in the next generation. And all of a sudden, humans start realizing, hey, it's not a bad thing these things are hanging around us, because they're alerting us to other predators and other threats, especially at night when we can't see. And through that win-win scenario and relationship, humans kept them around. And as they kind of advanced and started to understand the ease from hunting and the advent of some agriculture and living in one place for longer periods of time and having more free time, they were able to start selectively breeding dogs just because that dog did it well and this dog did it well, let's breed them, and they would get a better genetic component of what they wanted, mostly for hunting and for protecting. Versus the other theories that ancient man was stealing puppies out of dens, wolves out of dens, and raising them. And as Ray Coppinger has pointed out, that's very unlikely, if not impossible, simply because ancient man didn't have the time, energy, or the resources to feed a 2-week-old puppy. They didn't have bottles, didn't have nipples or milk or anything like that. They'd be able to feed this thing and keep it alive long enough. So the self-domestication theory sits well with me. And he kind of proved it as well by studying feral dogs in the, I think, Mexico City dumps, and seeing how those animals were living essentially off of the refuge of humans and staying close to their food sources, which was essentially the humans. Now, this brings me to my last person. This name probably won't be very familiar with you, and this is Konrad Lorenz. We won't get into his political side of things or his military aspects during World War II, but Konrad Lorenz was a ethologist, a zoologist. He actually won a Nobel Prize in physiology of medicine and did some really amazing stuff. Now, not necessarily directly with training, but what he brought to the forefront was the innate instincts and abilities of animals. And he also discovered imprinting, that certain things like geese and ravens will imprint and thus make them null and void to anybody else other than the person they imprint it on. And one of the things that he discussed about drives and desires, and he gives an example in one of his writings here, and I'm going to quote, "To gain a desired prey, a dog or wolf will do things that, in other contexts, they would shy away from, running through thorn bushes, jumping into cold water, and exposing themselves to risk which would normally frighten them. All these inhibitory mechanisms act as a co-weight to the effects of learning mechanisms. The organism cannot allow itself to pay a price which is not worth paying." So essentially, you have a dog that has a drive, and it's going to fulfill that drive, especially when that drive is paired with essentially Maslow's hierarchy of needs, eating. It's going to do things that were necessarily riskier in that scenario than it would be otherwise. Now, why is this important? This is a very important context when starting to introduce protection training and understanding that your dog will do things that it otherwise would not. Internal instinct, because some dogs have it and other dogs don't. A dog with a very low prey drive is not going to chase somebody to the end of the earth just to bite them like a Malinois or Dutch Shepherd or German Shepherd would, right? So you have to understand that ethology. You have to understand how that dog is ticking internally to be able to have a better understanding of the training. And that is why I believe that Konrad Lorenz is one of the most notable people in the dog training world that is completely forgotten about, and lack of understanding of his research and what he's done for ethology in the dog training world needs to be carried on, and people need to study what he wrote about in his research. It's really amazing stuff. Thank you for joining me in this podcast and understanding the history and the founding mothers and fathers of the dog training world. Now, I didn't go into any of the modern dog trainers. I want to talk about the history, the ones who laid the foundation, did the research, were in the trenches long before this information was there. Operating conditioning did not exist until B.F. Skinner and came about with it and laid it out and how it works in classical conditioning. Konrad Lorenz bringing forth ethology and drives and understanding traits and the instinct and ability of animals to survive. So obviously it was there, but he laid it out for us to better understand. And we need to have a much better understanding of what these founders did for us in the modern day world. And in doing so, will make us all better trainers and better dog owners as a whole. And this is where, the train smart comes from. This is what it's about: constantly learning, constantly evolving, and not being so hard-headed and closed-minded and saying, I know everything that I know and I don't need to know anything else. And you don't know what you don't know until you know it. And I encourage you, if you're a dog trainer or just a dog enthusiast, go look up some of these people and read some of the stuff they did. It is phenomenal. And it will be very eye-opening for you as just an individual and help you grow and help you learn as well. So thank you so much for joining the show today. And as always, like, subscribe, and share. And if you found this information useful, please give me a comment. Let me know. If you want to talk about any of these other people that we discussed today in more detail, drop me a comment below. More than happy to nerd out on it and do some more research and talk about these individuals more in depth. Happy to do that. I will see you on the next show. And as always, train smart.